Hello everyone, my name is Simone Somekh and I'm an editor at the New York Transatlantic. On Sunday, the French people voted in the first round of their presidential elections. They chose Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen as their finalists. One of them will become president on May 7th. Today, I'm joined by Hugo Bouvard at New York University. Thank you for coming, Hugo.
Thank you for inviting me.
Hugo is currently a visiting scholar here at the Institute of French Studies at NYU. He used to be a lecturer in French at Duke University, and he's doing his doctoral work in sociology and political science at Paris Dauphine in Paris. Hugo is with us today to discuss and analyze the results of this first round of the French elections. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm great. So we've been reading a lot of news, we've been seeing a lot of graphics and data, and we want to break them down a little bit today. So first of all, for those of our viewers who are not familiar with French politics, how does the electoral process work?
Right. So it was definitely a fascinating election, and I'm ready to discuss more about the analysis. But yeah, I think it would be helpful to talk a little bit about the process. So the French presidential election has two rounds, and the first round was last Sunday, and 11 candidates ran. But only the two who got the most number of votes qualified for the second round, and those two candidates are Marine Le Pen and Emmanuel Macron. And so the runoff election will be on May 7th, as you said. Mm-hmm. And on the two other candidates got a big portion of the votes. Those are Jean-Luc Mélenchon and François Fillon, who both got around 20% of the votes, whereas Marine Le Pen got 21% and Emmanuel Macron 24%. So it was a pretty tight race in the first round.
Can you tell me just a few words about the candidates? I want to hear about, of course, about Le Pen and Macron, but also about the other ones since they still received a lot of votes.
Yeah. So Emmanuel Macron is the youngest, so we can start with him. He's 39 years old. He's a former investment banker. He was never elected to public office, but he was the Minister of Economy for François Hollande, the current French president. So he's no newbie in the political clout, but he was never elected to office. And he's a centrist candidate, and I can talk a little bit more about his policy just in a few seconds. But Marine Le Pen, if we compare her to him, she's a bit older, she's 49. She is a member of the European Parliament, so she has more experience in office, I would say, even if she wasn't elected deputy or mayor. And she's the daughter of the former head of the far-right party, the National Front, that now she's the leader of that party. But her father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, was the head of that party for 40 years. So the Le Pen name is very well known in France as a member of the far-right party.
Who are Mélenchon and Fillon, who also received a lot of votes?
Right. So François Fillon is the representative of the main right-wing party in France, the Republicans, and his campaign was written with political scandals. So he got less than what he expected, but he still got 20% of the vote. So he's a more mainstream conservative candidate, I would say. Whereas Jean-Luc Mélenchon, it's pretty interesting because he is the spokesperson for La France Insoumise, which is a left-wing movement that he created a couple of years ago, and that got a lot of attraction. And so he was polling really low a couple months ago, and his success was pretty unexpected for a lot of political commentators, and he almost got 20% of the votes. Yep.
This is the first time in French politics that both finalists in the final round, they are not from a mainstream political party. Do you see this as an exceptional moment, or do you see this as a turning point? This is the beginning of a new chapter in French politics.
It's hard to tell, but it's definitely worth noticing that for the first time in the history of the Fifth Republic in France, so for the past 50 years, it's the first time that none of the two main mainstream political parties qualify for the second round of the French presidential elections. It's definitely worth noticing. And what is interesting as well is that both Marine Le Pen and Emmanuel Macron presented themselves as anti-system candidates. And what it means is that they run against the traditional political elites that have run the country for the past 50 years. So whether it's true or not is debatable, but that's how they presented themselves. And what's interesting for the second round is that everyone who lost in the first round and pretty much all the political elites in France call to vote for Macron in the second round. So now he can no longer present himself. I mean, it's going to be difficult for him to present himself as an anti-system candidate since the system supports him.
Endorsed him. Did everyone endorse him, also Mélenchon?
No, so Mélenchon is pretty much the only one who didn't endorse him yet, but he said that he was going to consult with his electorate base, and he's going to announce who he's endorsing for the second round. So in the next few days, we will know who Mélenchon will endorse.
Wouldn't it be very controversial if Mélenchon decided not to endorse Macron?
Yeah, so he's definitely not going to endorse Le Pen because he's been fighting her for his entire political life. But he might not maybe endorse Macron. Yes, it would be very controversial in French politics.
And radical, yeah.
And radical, yeah.
So what you're saying there is very interesting, that we see here that this distrust for the political elites, this election proves that populism and nationalism are not the only answers to this distrust, because Macron really represents a more globalist view. He supports the European Union. So do we see here that there is still a consistent portion of the people in Europe, and specifically here in France, who still believe in the European Union, still believe in the world as a global entity?
Well, there's definitely a portion of the electorate that is on these positions, as you just stated them. But you need to remember, he only got 24% of the votes. So even if he came first, it's not a great score for a first round of a presidential election. In the past presidential elections in France, the candidate who came first in the first round usually got about 30% or a little bit less of the votes. So it's still not a great score for Macron. But it's true that not everyone is frustrated with the European Union or globalization, but there's definitely a big chunk of the electorate that expresses that frustration through the Marine Le Pen vote or Jean-Luc Mélenchon, because Jean-Luc Mélenchon's platform was about renegotiating the European treaties, but worst case scenario, leaving the European Union as well. And
while Le Pen is she's very outspoken about wanting to leave the European Union.
Yes, she is. It's one of her main
goals,
goals in her program.
What does the vote tell us about divides within the society? I want to know if there are generational divides, how the young people voted, because I know Mélenchon was very popular among the young people, and also Le Pen is very popular.
Yeah, no, definitely. So it's very interesting to break down the results by categories. But first of all, I would say that the turnout was not very high, and it was actually the second lowest turnout for a French presidential election in the history of the Fifth Republic. So a lot of people didn't go to vote, and most of these people are unemployed or pretty poor. So it's interesting to remember that. But yeah, in terms of age, it's really fascinating because there's clear divides. So if you are between 18 and 25, chances are that you went for Mélenchon and then Le Pen. If you are between 25 and 35, then you probably voted for Macron. But then if you are between 35 and 59, which is like 25 years old category, chances are that you voted for Le Pen. So Le Pen got high scores in the younger generations, but also in the middle-age population, definitely. And in terms of income and education, it's also interesting to note that some of the least educated population, the poorest, went for Le Pen, but
overwhelmingly so?
Not overwhelmingly, because she was closely followed by Mélenchon on these people on these categories. So she didn't win the blue collar working class vote as much as she thought she would probably, or that political commentator thought she would. And Mélenchon did actually pretty well for these categories. And basically, without being too caricatural, the richer you are, the more likely you voted for Macron and a little bit Fillon.
Yeah, right. And also speaking, I was looking at the data from the international community, like the French expats. I see here, especially I was looking at the data in San Francisco, and there is an overwhelming majority, like we're talking about 50% of the voters in the consulates, in the French consulates abroad, who voted for Macron.
Right. So I don't know about San Francisco, but here in New York and more generally in the United States, yeah, Macron even got more than 50% of the vote.
Right.
And it's not very surprising if you consider that the French population living in the US is generally more educated and richer than the general French population. And these are the people who went for Macron. So it's not very surprising.
And probably being expats, they identify more with the kind of views that he presents. Like he's more of a centrist kind of view, more globalist, more international friendly.
Yeah, definitely. So Macron is definitely a supporter of the free market. He's pro-European Union and pro the freedom of movement and goods and people. So the French people living in the U.S. probably identify more with that view than Marine Le Pen, who is way more nationalist and pro anti-European Union. Yep.
Do you expect anyone to win?
Well, it's hard to make any prediction, but if you just add up the scores in the first round, Macron should win in a landslide because everyone called to vote for him in the second round. But what's going to be the key factor is the turnout. If a lot of Mélenchon's voters or other voters don't show up at the polls in the second round, then it will be tighter. But I'm pretty confident that Macron will win, even if...
But it looks like most people are going to move from voting from one candidate who did not make it to the final round is like more likely to move to, statistically, more likely to move to Macron rather than to Le Pen.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think that Marine Le Pen has a lot of potential voters that didn't vote for her in the first round.
That will go out and vote for her in the second round.
It's very unlikely, but...
We'll find out. Thank you, Hugo, for coming. It was a lovely talk. I hope to have you again here at the Transatlantic. You can follow us on nyta.us, the New York Transatlantic, for more updates from a New York perspective on the European events and news. Thank you so much for watching. See you soon. Bye.